Maintaining a landscape requires knowledge, skill, and careful planning. Because fertilizing can be an important part of keeping a lawn healthy, it's important to learn how to apply the right type of fertilizer correctly. Doing so will yield the best results: proper growth rates, reduced erosion, happier customers, and greater profits. More importantly, the time you invest will enhance the community's green spaces, provide wildlife habitat, and protect water quality. There are several methods of applying fertilizers to a lawn, garden, or green space. Lawns are most commonly fertilized using a granular product in a rotary or broadcast spreader. Because lawns cover most of the green spaces in an urban area, this method of fertilization is the focus of today's video. It is equally important to learn how to use other methods safely. Regardless of application format, you should seek proper training and practice these skills to successfully achieve the desired results, without wasting time and money or causing unnecessary pollution. Fertilizers provide nutrients that may not be available in local soils. Slow-release fertilizers trickle feed turf and maintain that green-up effect over an extended period of time. Because plants will generally take up the amount of nutrients they need, excess fertilizer could leach or run off, potentially resulting in water pollution and money wasted. In addition, over-fertilizing can result in excess growth, which is also undesirable in many situations. Professional-grade broadcast spreaders are designed to scatter fertilizer granules uniformly over a wide area of turf. By walking the spreader in straight lines and overlapping the last row you walked, you can eliminate the streaking of turf. Most professional-grade spreaders include a deflector shield, which is necessary for treatment along walkways, pavement, water bodies, and around beds of sensitive plant material. When properly used, the deflector shield will prevent fertilizer granules from reaching inappropriate areas. This is important because fertilizers can harm water bodies and wildlife. Deflector shields also reduce the need to blow or sweep granules off paved surfaces, which may be stained by the pellets or contribute to pollution during the next watering event. Proper use of a spreader is an important tool to deliver accurate amounts of fertilizer so that you can keep turf healthy and effectively protect water quality. This is because healthy turf is more resistant to disease and weeds, and also better at holding soil in place, thereby reducing erosion. The next few minutes we will demonstrate the proper use and maintenance of a rotary or broadcast spreader, including preparation for use, trimming, product application, and equipment maintenance. In a separate section of this video, we will demonstrate a method of calibrating the spreader to deliver the correct rate of granular material. As with the application of any product, it is important that you carefully read and follow the instructions on the product label. Nothing is more frustrating or time-consuming than arriving at a job site and finding that your equipment doesn't work. Any job should start with an equipment inspection before leaving the shop. A quick inspection of the spreader should include checking the tires, the impeller, the deflector, the shutoff handle, and the hopper screen. First, check the tires to ensure that they are properly inflated so that you can push the spreader with ease. Next, check the rotating impeller to ensure that it is firmly attached to the shaft. If the impeller can be spun without turning the drive wheel, either the pin that holds it to the shaft is broken or the gear assembly is worn out. A broken impeller will cause too much or too little fertilizer to be used. Check to ensure that the deflector shield lines up properly with the impeller when in the trim position. Otherwise, fertilizer will spread where it is not wanted. Finally, check to see that the shutoff handle works properly and that the hopper screen is in place. After you've completed the spreader inspection, you're ready to head to your job site and prepare the area to be fertilized. Before applying your product, a good practice is to walk the area you are treating. Remove any obstacles such as lawn furniture, toys, and pet food, or water dishes. Make note of any special treatment situations such as beds of sensitive plants, swimming pools, or water bodies that must be protected during treatment. When near these areas, you will need to engage the deflector shield. Before loading your material, it is important to select the proper settings for the spreader, including the correct opening size as well as a third hole adjustment setting if appropriate. Remove the hopper screen to access the opening. Some professional grade spreaders come with a plastic calibration gauge. Using the calibration gauge is generally more accurate than depending solely on the letters and numbers on the adjustment gate. First, check the label for the proper hole opening for your spreader. Open the spreader shut-off lever and loosen the rate control knob to the adjustment gate. Insert the gauge in the center spreader opening and adjust the opening to the specified width by moving the lever to the left and then tightening the knob. To test the setting, close the spreader and then open it again to see if the hole opens to the proper width. Replace the hopper screen and close the spreader. It's now time to add fertilizer granules. While some spreaders can hold up to 80 pounds of product, most will push easier with 50 pounds or less in the hopper. Remember to fill the spreader on a paved surface rather than on the lawn so that any spilled material can be swept up and used without damaging the turf. Perhaps the most important part of applying fertilizer to any landscape is calculating the correct amount of fertilizer needed to cover the desired area. The first step in the process is measuring the area to determine how many square feet you need to cover. For example, if your landscape is a square that is 50 feet long by 50 feet wide, you multiply 50 times 50, which is 2,500 square feet. When a yard is irregularly shaped, calculate the square footage of smaller sections and add them together. If using a 50% slow-release product, the Green Industry's Best Management Practices Guidelines suggest applying no more than 1 pound of nitrogen for every 1,000 square feet of turf in a single application. Next, divide 100 by the percent of nitrogen in your product. For example, if your product is 10-10, you will divide 100 by 10 to get the number of pounds of product you need for 1,000 square feet. Then multiply that number by 2.5 from your previous calculation to get the number of pounds of product you need for 2,500 square feet. If using a quick release product, the recommended rate is 1/2 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, so adjust accordingly. Local laws may vary and sometimes dictate the type of fertilizer and the time of year it can be applied. Double check to make sure that you are meeting the requirements in your area. Now that you've prepared the spreader, checked over the area to be treated, and calculated the amount of product to use, you're ready to get started and spread the product. If you stand behind the spreader, the impeller rotates in a counterclockwise direction. Different brands of granular spreaders have different mechanisms for dispersing material. If using a spreader with a 3-hole delivery mechanism, material falling through the left hole is thrown to the right side of the spreader. Material falling through the middle hole is thrown forward, and material falling through the right hole is thrown to the left. For uniform distribution, always start by fertilizing around the edges of the property, called a trim pass. To set the spreader for trimming, eliminate the throwing of material to the right side of the spreader by closing the adjusting hole in the spreader, if applicable, and or lowering the deflector shield. Trim the outside edge of the property starting at one corner and move in a counterclockwise direction. Be sure that you are pushing the spreader forward before you open the hopper, and close the hopper before stopping the spreader. This prevents material from spilling on the ground. As you are treating, watch the spread of material in front of the spreader. Close the hopper or engage the deflector shield to avoid throwing material into non-target areas such as pavement, plant beds, or water bodies. If you're new to these techniques, it's a good idea to practice before loading the product. After trimming around the perimeter of the lawn, it may be necessary to trim around ponds, beds, or hardscapes. Always trim with the area to be protected on your right because that is the side with the deflector shield. Hence, trimming around obstacles will, therefore, be done in a clockwise direction. Once you have trimmed the perimeter and removed any obstacles, treat the remaining area. Retract the deflector shield and open the third hole, if applicable, to the setting indicated on the label. Treat inside the trimmed area by making parallel passes back and forth across the lawn. Start far enough inside the trimmed area so that the spreader throws granules to the wheel mark made during your trim pass. Because this distance can be as much as 6 to 8 feet when using dense fertilizer granules, it is critical to determine the proper width between spreader passes before you begin. This can be determined in the calibration process, which will be covered later in this program. Again, start pushing the spreader before you open the hopper. Shut the spreader off as the front of your pattern reaches the trimmed area at the end of the pass. Granules thrown to the edge of your new pass should fall in the wheel marks of your previous pass, resulting in 100% overlap between spreader passes. which is the best way to apply the right amount of product evenly and avoid streaking. Refill your spreader at the end of a pass when it still has 4 or 5 pounds left in the hopper. Since you should already know the amount of product your property requires, pace yourself to ensure all of the product is delivered accurately. Remember to move to a paved area for refilling. This will prevent turf damage and allow cleanup of spilled material. When you finish treating a lawn, record the date of treatment, along with the amount, brand, and label details of material applied, a description of the area treated, and any other data, such as wind direction and wind speed, that may be required by state regulations or your company. Double check that the spreader is properly calibrated by comparing the amount of material actually used against what should have been used based on the square footage calculation that you did prior to the application. Since the amount of product used is also influenced by the speed that you walk, it may be necessary to close the spreader setting slightly as your walking pace begins to slow in the afternoon. Many variables can influence the accuracy of the delivery of the product, including walking speed, hopper opening size, spreader condition, fertilizer condition, weather, and terrain. At the end of the day, empty the contents of the spreader into an original product bag that is properly labeled. Clamp the bag shut to avoid spilling and reduce spoilage. Rinse the spreader to remove any product residue. An unclean spreader can accumulate corrosive product buildup, especially on the impeller and the gear axle bearing, which need to be free of dirt and grit to work properly. Once a week, lubricate all grease fittings and remove excess grease according to manual recommendations. Lightly grease the metal runners of the deflector shield assembly and store the spreader in a secure location. Let's review the recommended use of a professional grade spreader. Before application, check the spreader for tire inflation, impeller, and mechanical operation before you leave the shop each morning. Walk the area to be treated and remove obstacles. This is also a good time to estimate the size of the area to be treated and calculate the amount of product you will need to cover the area to be fertilized. Set the hole opening size before adding product to the hopper. Remember to fill the spreader while it is on a paved surface. During application, trim the areas to be treated by closing the adjustable hole if present, and or lowering the deflector shield. Open the spreader after it is moving and before you stop. Open the third hole to the proper setting and or raise the deflector before starting to treat the center of the lawn. Overlap the treatment areas by throwing granules back to the wheel marks of your last pass. Record the date, type, and amount of product used for future reference. At the end of the day, transfer any material left in the hopper to a properly labeled bag. Wash the spreader thoroughly and lubricate it weekly. Following these simple procedures will ensure accurate treatment and good turf response while minimizing environmental impacts. Now we'll review the best way to ensure your spreader is delivering the product accurately. Spreader calibration. Calibration is a process of checking and adjusting the spreader to be sure it is delivering the correct amount of product. Calibration should be performed at least one time for each type of product use, because different sized granules spread at different rates. Using too much fertilizer could cost you extra money and contribute to water pollution, while too little fertilizer could stress turf and lead to dissatisfied customers. Spreader calibration is a process that requires the following items, which need to be gathered together before you begin: calculator, measuring tape, paper and pen, bucket, scale capable of weighing 10 pounds to the nearest ounce, the spreader, spreader calibration gauge, a product that you commonly use, and possibly a tarp unless you have a paved area with no traffic where granules can be easily picked up. First step of calibration is to choose the product you want to measure and the amount you would typically apply to a 1,000 square foot yard. In the earlier lesson, we discussed how to calculate the amount of product. Next, you will need to determine the width of spread. Set the spreader to the recommended setting for the product you are using, or use the setting of E or 12. Walking at a comfortable pace, spread some granules on clean concrete or a tarp. Measure the distance from the center of the spreader to the edge of the spread pattern. Be sure to determine the edge of the pattern by where the granules hit the ground, not where they stop rolling. You may want to have a second person take this measurement for you. The distance from the center of the spreader to the edge of the pattern is called the spread width, and may be as wide as 8 feet when using dense granules. This is the distance you need to step over between spreader passes. Now use a calculator to determine the distance the spreader must be pushed to treat 1,000 square feet by dividing 1,000 by the spread width. For example, if the spread width is 8 feet, 1,000 square feet divided by 8 feet equals 125 feet. Mark off 125 feet, the distance needed to treat 1,000 square feet of turf on clean, dry pavement. Set the spreader at the recommended setting from the product label and add exactly 10 pounds of material to the hopper. Apply fertilizer over the measured area using the application guidelines and repeat the application as you return to the starting point. Remember that granules thrown to the edge of your new pass should reach the wheel marks of your previous pass, roughly 8 feet away according to the spread width determined previously. Remember, you need 100% product overlap, so a minimum of 2 passes would be necessary to complete the calibration. Carefully pour the material remaining in the hopper into a bucket and determine how much was applied by subtracting the weight of fertilizer remaining in the hopper from the original 10 pounds. If delivery amount is not on target, repeat the process, starting with 10 pounds each time. Adjust the gate opening until the spreader delivers the correct amount of fertilizer needed for 1,000 square feet. When you have applied the correct amount, empty the spreader and measure the size of the opening using the calibration gauge. Confirm the spreader setting by repeating the calibration at the final settings. Record the product name, blend analysis, spread width, and calibration gauge setting in a journal. You can now use the calibration gauge to set your spreader to apply the same rate of this material every time. If you keep this information, you will never have to calibrate for this rate of the product again unless significant changes are made in the product particle size or density. Proper use and calibration of the spreader must become a routine process, just like mowing, edging, and pruning. The rewards are thick, healthy grass, fewer pests, and good cost management. Following these instructions is also critical in ensuring you apply granular fertilizers effectively and that you manage your responsibility for minimizing potential sources of pollution and protecting water quality.